Welcome to the next part of the 1-3 section. We're going to continue talking about equivalent rational numbers today. Just a reminder of our learning objectives. They've been on all the videos so far, so you should have them somewhere. So to start out with, we're going to talk about identifying and writing different forms of equivalent ratios among rational numbers. So in math and in real life, we compare things all the time. We look at what we have and what someone else has, or we look at the difference between values and we compare them. Comparing comes very naturally. Using ratios comes naturally too, because ratios are a way that we can compare numbers and values. So what is a ratio? A ratio compares two numbers or quantities called terms. For example, suppose there are 3 green apples and 4 red apples in a basket. Okay, so we can express the ratio of green apples to red apples as a fraction. So we would say 3 green to 4 red. We can also express it as a ratio in words. We can say 3 to 4, or we can use a colon. We would still read it as 3 to 4, even with a colon. So again, there's 3 ways to express this ratio: a fraction, words, and a colon. We can also use a ratio to express a part to the whole. So for example, we can express the ratio of green apples to the total number of apples in the basket. Okay, so if there are 3 green and 4 red, that means there are 7 total apples in the basket. So the ratio of green apples to total apples would be 3 to 7, or using a colon, 3 to 7, or we could use a fraction, 3/7. Okay, so just the reminder of the 3 ways we can write a ratio: in a fraction, using the word to, or using a colon. Okay, so now that we know how to write a ratio, let's look at writing equivalent ratios. Now, a ratio shows the relationship between two quantities. Equivalent ratios can be used to show the same relationship between quantities. Remember that the word equivalent means equal. Now, since we can write ratios in fraction form, we can use what we know about finding equivalent fractions to help us identify equivalent ratios. Here's where simplifying fractions is going to help us. We can simplify ratios to discover equivalents just as we could simplify fractions. So here we are, we're given 2 ratios. We're given 7 to 6 and 13 to 12, and we're asked to determine if these ratios are equivalent. Okay, so what I want to do first is I want to write these as fractions. And I want to know if these are the same. Okay, so I want the denominators to be the same. Well, 6 and 12, the first number that 6 and 12 both go into is 12. So I don't have to change this second fraction, but I do have to change this first one by multiplying the top and the bottom by 2. So really, 7 times 2 is 14, 6 times 2 is 12. I get 14 over 12. So I get 14 twelfths and 13 twelfths. Are these the same? Okay, and the answer is no, they aren't, because 14 is not equal to 13. So 7/6 is not equivalent to 13 twelfths. Okay, another way we can determine if 2 ratios are equivalent is we write them in fraction form again, and then we cross multiply the terms in the ratio. Okay, and if our cross products are equal, then the ratios are equivalent. If they're not equal, then they're not equivalent. So we're going to use that to determine if 3 to 4 is the same as 12 to 16. So I write them both as fractions. And then I'm going to cross multiply. So I'll cross here, and I'll do 4 times 12, giving me 48. And I'll cross here. So I'll do 3 times 16, giving me 48. You'll notice I get the same number for both cross products. When that happens, these are equivalent. Okay, so they are the same ratios because I got the same thing when I took the cross products. Writing ratios in simplest form. So in the last section, we briefly touched on how to simplify ratios that are in fraction form to see if they're equivalent or not. Okay, we'll explore this further now. What does it mean to simplify? To simplify means to make it smaller. When we simplify, we make a fraction smaller. It is still equivalent to the larger form of the fraction, but it is smaller. So that would be like taking 6/8, dividing both top and bottom by 2, and getting 3/4. Okay, that is how we simplify. How do we simplify a ratio in fraction form? Well, to write a ratio in simplest form, find the greatest common factor in both terms, like we just did up there. Okay, we could take a 2 out of both, and so we did. Okay, then we divide both terms by that number, and we should get our simplified form. If you notice, you check again, 3/4, I can't take anything out of 3 and 4, but if I could, I would need to do so. Okay, so we keep doing that until we can't take anything out anymore, and 3/4 is the simplified version. Okay, so what I want you to do is I want you to simplify the ratio 25/40. So get this written down as a fraction, pause the video, simplify it, then hit play and see how you did. Okay, as you can see, I could take a 5 out of the top and the bottom, so I divide the top and bottom by 5. 25 divided by 5 is 5. 40 divided by 5 is 8. So my simplified ratio is 5 to 8. If I want to write it as a ratio with colon, I would write it like this, 5 to 8. So why is this useful when we're working with ratios? Okay, it's useful because we can simplify ratios in fraction form to see if they're equivalent. Okay, we can also use the simplified ratio to find an equivalent ratio. To do this, we can multiply both terms of the original ratio by the same number to find an equivalent one. Okay, so now they want us to find 3 equivalent ratios for 1 to 9. Okay, so 1 to 9, 1 to 9, and 1 to 9. So what I need to do now is I need to multiply 1 and 9 by the same number. It doesn't matter what number to get my equivalent ratio. So I can multiply it by 2. So if I multiply both 1 and 9 by 2, I would get 2 to 18. That is an equivalent ratio. I could multiply by 3. If I multiply 1 and 9 by 3, my ratio becomes 3 to 27. That is another equivalent ratio. And I could also multiply by 4. If I multiply the ratio 1 to 9 by 4, I would get 4 to 36. And again, another equivalent ratio. Again, you don't have to pick these 3. You can pick any number to multiply both of them by, and you would get an equivalent ratio. To end off the video here, we're just going to review a few things, so I want you to do all 3 of these. So pause the video, get the work done, get your answers, and then go ahead and hit play and see how you did. Okay, so to simplify 4 to 16, I wrote it as a fraction, 4/16. You'll notice that the greatest common factor between 4 and 16 is 4. I can divide top and bottom by 4, giving me a fraction of 1/4. And then I can write that back as a ratio of 1 to 4. For the next one, simplifying the ratio 3 to 18, I write it as 3/18. Greatest common factor between 3 and 18 is 3. I can take a 3 out of both, so I divide top and bottom by 3 and I get 1/6. Write that as a ratio of 1 to 6. Okay, writing an equivalent ratio to 4 to 5, I chose to multiply both numbers by 2, giving me a ratio of 8 to 10. Okay, so the first 2 you should get the same thing. The last one, depending on what you multiplied by, you might not get the same thing as I did, but you should get still an equivalent ratio of 4 to 5.